Hi everyone, I haven't done a video like this for a while and I thought that the anniversary of this disaster was one I really needed to cover. Sadly, my video making skills like this have not improved, but I hope you will all still enjoy the subject matter covered. Obviously I make notes, I can't remember everything, so you will probably hear the paper rustling in the background. On your screen at the moment you will see several different photos of the main Wallsend pits. This is just to give you an idea of how things looked at the time the disaster happened. I will rotate them and hopefully get it so that they don't run out before I reach the point where I move on to the photo that I have got details about. So it'll just be a case of each picture will change on the screen sort of intermittently anyway. Tuesday, October the 23rd, 1821 started like any other day for the miners of Wallsend. They would set out in the dark to work in the dark and return home in the dark. Most would probably never see daylight. Men and boys as young as 5 years old heading to work without knowledge of what was to happen that fateful day. At around 8 a.m, a dreadful explosion took place at the Wallsend colliery. It was caused by hydrogen gas. Some 55 men, some reports say 56, and boys were at work at the time, and all but 3 of them were killed. Reports from the local newspaper suggest it was not only heard but also felt above ground, with people saying their furniture had moved at the time of the blast took place. It was also actually reported that it was heard as far away as Whitley Bay, but whether that was true or not, I really couldn't say. Another report claims that the body of one boy was blown to the top of the shaft, only to fall back to the bottom. Can any of us even begin to imagine seeing something like that? It must have been very distressing to witness. Mr. Buddle, and I assume this would be John Buddle, who was the viewer for Wallsend Colliery from around 1806, led the rescuers to the pit bottom in the hope of finding any survivors. Sadly, most had been instantly killed and only a handful were still alive. By 10 o'clock, several bodies had been brought to the surface, and by this time relatives had gathered in the hope of news of their loved ones. The Chronicle of 1821 reports some 600 people had gathered in this way at the mouth of the pit. In some way, I felt about the later 1835 disaster. I cannot even begin to imagine how they must have felt waiting to see if their loved ones, fathers, husbands, brothers and sons were alive, and sadly few would have been blessed with good news. One eyewitness at the time was so distressed by the scene that they actually had to leave. A newspaper report states that the bodies were brought up one after another as soon as they were found. It was an awful scene amongst frenzied, heart-rending shrieks and tears of their distressed loved ones. They had been found in various postures and positions, no doubt in anyone's mind the damage which had been caused by the blast. In my mind I wonder if they were even recognisable at first glance. The article goes on to say, fathers and mothers now too wail the loss of their children on whom they depend for the support of their declining years, and who fondly had hoped that it would be their loving hands that would have closed their eyes in death, not theirs the eyes of their children. It paints a true feeling of how those poor families must have felt. One man who died, Thomas Holt, was also a schoolmaster, and by all accounts of the newspapers at the time, he also took his time to help and teach his fellow miners. It was felt that his loss was a very heavy one for all. He left a widow and family unprovided for. The huge loss of life left many widows and orphans, and it was hoped that aside from the help from the colliery owners, that friends and neighbours would help to support them. The owners of the colliery provided coffins for all the deceased and also paid 1 guinea towards the funeral charges for each person. The majority of funerals took place on Thursday afternoon, with 48 persons being buried, with the Reverend George Jackson presiding. They were buried in St Peter's Churchyard and 3 at Ballast Hills Cemetery in Newcastle. It was reported in another article that some were buried at Wallsend Old Church, which I could only assume would be Holy Cross ruins, but I don't know if this was true or not. On the day of the funeral, collieries in the area were closed and minors from those attended the funerals. It was said that several thousand people were present and that St Peter's Churchyard and along the walls of the churchyard was a dense mass of mourners. If you close your eyes and imagine St Peter's Churchyard, it's hard to envisage so many people in that one place. I think it showed the devastation and sorrow that was felt by everyone in the area, including the workers at other collieries. The inquest on the bodies, which had been held on the 24th, stated they had died by accident as a result of explosion by hydrogen gas. On the screen now are photos of the only 2 known headstones in St Peter's Churchyard. Obviously this one, when I originally took a photo of this, which is my photo several years ago, it's fairly clear to read. It's not too bad. It has since then deteriorated and become harder to read. Age has weathered it, and the fact that it's unfortunately fallen means that obviously rainwater collects and doesn't run off as it does in other headstones. This headstone is a family headstone, and it's obviously not massively clear to see, so I have actually cropped and enhanced this one, which shows you some of the names, which are a little bit easier to see than what the previous photo was. This photo shows the parish burial records for a child named Samuel Garrett, one of the many children who died in the explosion. It's sadly not very clear to read, but if I move the mouse on my computer, it is this particular entry here. You can see the name of George Jackson, who was the vicar at the time, and the entry underneath is also another from the same disaster. In October 2021, on the 200-year anniversary of the disaster, a plaque was unveiled in St Peter's Churchyard, a ceremony I was able to attend along with many living descendants of those who had died in the disaster. The plaque can now be seen on your screen, and to end, I will read the names and ages of all those who died that fateful day. Michael Moon Sr., 44. Michael Moon Jr., 12. Alexandra Moon, 8. William Bell Sr., 45. William Bell Jr., 16. Robert Dallop, 23. Robert Bainbridge, 7. William Rogerson, 75. William Jackson, 20. Thomas Davison, 36. John Hutton, 20. William Hutton, 24. Henry Bowden, 25. Robert Bowden, 27. Edward Shotton, 20. John Shotton, 18. Christopher Waggett, 31. Thomas Waggett, 34. Edward Wilson, 30. William Wilson, 28. George Pendlington, 49. Nicholas English, 32. William Johnson, 24. John Johnson, 23. Richard Heppel Sr., 50. Richard Heppel Jr., 17. John Pendlington, 33. David Smart, 31. William Smart, 34. Samuel Garrett, 5 years old. George Kyle, 11. John Berkeley, 12. George Thompson, 12. Roger Buddle, 17. Peter Hayes, 19. Henry Bolam, 77. William Coxon, 62. George Longstaff, 46. John Robinson, 40. Thomas Holt, 41. John Elliot, 47. Edward Campbell, 35. Thomas Lowry, 32. George Roseby, 32. John Ferry, 26. James Joblin, 25. James Walker, 22. George Mason, 21. John Smith, 21. John Gordon, 20. James Kelly, 20.